Coming up on Growing Indoors with the Eco Garden House, we're going to plant our tomatoes and basil and show you how to do it so you have the best success. Sponsored by Eco Garden House. At last, an indoor greenhouse equipped with complete, easy lighting and watering systems. You can grow perfect organic produce and plants at your home all year round. Grow 24/7, 365. You now have no excuses. Welcome to Growing Indoors with the Eco Garden House. I'm Joy Baird. If you missed our previous episodes, you can check those in the show notes below as we explain what the Eco Garden House is and how it can benefit you in your own growing situation and home. We're going to plant some tomatoes and some basil to start off with, and we're going to do it in a professional potting soil. Now you can choose whatever type of medium you would like to grow in, whether that's a cocoa coir base or a soilless base. We're going to use some professional potting soil from a supplier, and the ingredients that is in this potting soil, it contains a blend of certified leaf compost, peat moss, perlite, which allows the soil, that's them white styrofoam looking particles in it. It's not real styrofoam, it's a mineral that allows it's a product of nature that allows the soil to be more fluffy and aerated, as well as some slow or time release fertilizer. The fertilizer in here will release over about the next 60 to 90 days. What we have set up here, we've got our freshwater reservoir about 3/4 full. Now we chose to do that simply because we are not certain of the amount of water that we'll be using with our irrigation system here, but it's a trial thing. The gauge is indicated 3/4, and we've filled the water up. Now you can do this with a 5-gallon bucket. You can hook a hose up to your faucet. We just ran a hose from outside up through the window. It worked out very well. One thing you want to be conscious of is unplug your unit, because the fill reservoir is very close to the outlet that plugs into the wall, or your cord there. So unplug that so there's no shocking, no damage to the unit or to you. We have here a 2x4 foot grow bed. Now the mirror is here, that's simply to allow you to see more of what's going on when I'm planting, so that has nothing to do with the unit itself. This is a 2x4 by 14-15 inch deep grow bed, or grow box, raised bed, that we're going to be planting our tomatoes, our basil, and there will be other plants that we'll put in throughout the series. Right here we have our gray water pump system. If we have too much water, the water will run into the gray water system and we can pump it out. If done correctly, we won't have much of any. And this is our pump for our irrigation system. So with this container, and you can grow in whatever type of container, these are just grow bags from Root Trapper 2. Very nice grow bags. You can use plastic containers, whatever you desire. But with this system here, you want to be conscious and careful that you don't break these off, because that's a crucial element of this whole unit. So we took a very dense plastic pot, cut it in half, and just put it over top. So as this fills up, we don't have the potential of damaging the two units here. So that's something to keep in mind. And so we're going to fill this up. We won't fill it completely full with the professional potting soil, because 15 inches is far deeper than is required for any type of vegetable that you're planting, minus root crops such as carrots or parsnips. So we're going to go about 9-10 inches deep. That should be more than adequate. We'll get the soil in there, and then we'll start explaining how and the techniques of planting your tomatoes indoors in the Eco Garden House. So I ended up I filled this up, and it's about 7 inches deep, which is adequate for tomatoes, basil, beans, that type of crop that you'd be growing in the Eco Garden House. And again, you can use you can use grow bags, pop-up raised bed here from Root Trapper. That's purely up to your decision. Anything will work. We're just showing you what works, what has worked, and what works best for us. And then this has worked very well. That I put this cover here, we filled it up, and this protects the two pumps. Now, we're going to plant tomatoes. Now, tomatoes is one of the crops that almost every gardener attempts to grow, whether it's one container on their porch, patio, or deck, in the garden, as well as in the Eco Garden House. Now, you can start tomatoes from seed. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. We could sit here and plant these in the ground or in the potting soil and let them grow and it'd be fine. Well, we're accelerating the process so we can get tomatoes sooner. And what we have done here is we've got two different situations. This here was a volunteer tomato that was coming up in our traditional ground garden. We dug it up, we put it in this container, and the roots have expanded, and we're going to go ahead and plant this in here. Variety-wise, I'm not sure. We grow 27 varieties in our outdoor garden, so this is one of those varieties, and we're okay with that. We just don't know if it's a cherry, a beefsteak, a brandywine, a black krim, etc. So that's one way you can go ahead and get your tomatoes an accelerated start. Now, if you're growing in the early portions of the year, or you're in an area where starts are available at your local nursery, purchase them, bring them in, plant them. That works great. The advantage of growing in the Eco Garden House is you can plant tomatoes, peppers, green beans at any time of the year, whether it's Christmas Day, 4th of July, Arbor Day, Labor Day, it doesn't matter, simply because you are nature. You are controlling the environment. You are controlling how much light that is being allowed to be put on the plants, the temperature. So it's like a tropical climate, basically, year-round, if you allow it to be that way. Another way you can go ahead and get your tomatoes starts at an accelerated rate. If your nursery no longer supplies them, you can go ahead and propagate them from current plants that are growing in your garden or a neighbor's or a friend's garden. And here, this is what we've got. We've got roots forming on the stalk of the tomato, and we did this about a month ago. So this is how we did it in our garden to get these propagated so we can use them in the Eco Garden House. So one way you can continue the traits of the tomato plants that you've got growing in your garden in the middle of summer is, one, you can save the seeds by putting them in a jar and letting them ferment and draining the seeds off and letting them dry. Another way is if you have the opportunity to grow indoors under grow lights, you can, or in like a high tunnel, you can propagate tomatoes very easily. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take, this is a cherry, or this is a yellow plum tomato. So we're going to take and cut it right there at the base. And what I have here, now I've sacrificed some clusters of tomatoes. So I'm just going to take that flower bud off, take that flower bud off, going to remove that, and that, and that. Okay. So why have I done that? Because I'm going to take and I'm going to root it. Now I've only got a half of a jar of water. I'm going to fill it completely full. And what occurs is there's hair follicles. As we've talked about, you always plant tomatoes deep. And there's hair follicles here. And all of those hair follicles will begin to turn into roots in about a week to 2 weeks. So if I have the jar full, everything below my fingers will be roots. Everything above will be stalks. So I've already kind of got a jump start on my plants. And then when we take them indoors and plant them in our indoor grow room, then we've already got a jump start on our tomatoes. You can grow cherries or beefsteaks indoors. Just keep in mind you need adequate light, otherwise it will take a very long time for them to ripen. And in that instance, if they take a very long time to ripe, their skin's going to be very tough. The internal portions will be fine, it'll taste just like a tomato, but they will have a much tougher, thicker skin. So now it's been about a month and they have a lot of very nice roots, and we've just left them in mason jars with water. We've added a little liquid compost to them to give them a little boost, and you can see here that there is actually a tomato forming on this particular plant. Now we will remove that at the time of planting. I'll explain why that is. Now this is a purple cherry tomato. Cherokee purple, so this is a full slicing tomato. So let's get in here and we will go ahead and I'll show you how you can plant in the Eco Garden House in a raised bed here. So in amongst our seedling starts that we have planted specifically to grow in the Eco Garden House, I did take and this is a black krim that we rooted in the water, just like we did with all the other ones. But about 2 weeks ago I went and threw it in this empty cell in our tray in a root trapper or a root maker, just to see if the difference, if it would green up a little bit more versus sitting in the water, and it has done such that. Now I don't need to worry about it because once we put these in the soil here, they're going to perk right up. It was just an experimental process for my educational purposes to see what would happen. So we're just going to pull this one out gently. The soil is moist, so it should slide. There we go. Should slide out very nice. And now we're going to. We've got 2, 4, 5, 6 tomatoes. I'll get this out of the way. That we are going to put in here, or have the option of putting in here. So we kind of got to figure that out. Now with the controlled environment that we have in the Eco Garden House, we can plant these a little tighter than we can outside, simply because, again, we're controlling all aspects of growing here. So I've got a black crim, which is a purplish large beefsteak tomato. So this is a black crim, and this is what a black crim looks like. It's a dark purple. There's some green still on the shoulders because we pick them a little early outside, but it's a purplish, dark purplish as the pigment continues to change. And again, these will get 3.5, 4 foot tall, but we can control the growth of it by trimming it back at a consistent rate to keep it compact. Now, we're also going to plant the mystery tomato, which I'm excited about, as well as a Roma tomato and a yellow plum tomato. Just looks like a little tiny pear, basically, is what it appears to be when you harvest it. So the technique in planting, we want to keep in mind that we have already slow release fertilizer in this potting soil, as well as some compost, some certified leaf compost. Now, it's recommended, if you do go with a mixture such as this, you want to keep the soil moist, but more on the damp level than the wet level, simply because you have actual soil in this mixture. And now we might have some issues with some insects, which we will address at a later date, but if done correctly, it'll be a minimal amount of insect problems because, again, controlling the environment. So let's talk about planting this tomato right here. With it being very fresh, good soil, unlike native soil, we're going to actually use no fertilizer and no Epsom salt, as gardeners have instructed for many years to do such. First of all, I want to trim the lower leaves down, or off, and I want to plant this deep. We put this in soil, and you can see some of the roots here, but there's a lot of roots that can still be formed, and the reason why is the hair follicles will create roots. So what we're going to do here is take and plant this right about there, about 1 inch down from the top, or the leaf that I have left. And we're going to space these we're going to space them 2 foot apart. And then as they grow, we can work on the trellising process. So I'm just going to go all the way down as far as I can to plant that. Okay, now I'm just going to backfill. And I do want to label it, and I'll put a marker in there later. Now, the reason why we've chosen not to add fertilizer, simply because there's fertilizer, slow release fertilizer, in the soil already. We can additionally add a granular fertilizer or a liquid fertilizer in the instance that we feel that the plant needs a little kick in the growth. Now, in the traditional ground, we always recommend adding Epsom salt, because that helps allow the plant to take up the necessary calcium in the soil to prevent blossom and root rot. That's the black portion of the bottom of the tomato that some gardeners that grow traditionally in the ground experience. With this here, we've got a control in the soil, we've got a good soil, and we're going to keep the soil moist. And keeping the soil moist is one of the great detours of acquiring blossom end rot, because the calcium that's in the soil is not locked out because the soil is so dry the plant can't pick it up. So I'm going to get the rest of these planted. Then we'll talk a little bit about planting some basil in the corners of this grow bed. Am I on? So I got the 4 planted here, and again, this is the black crim. That's what that looks like. Roma, very familiar tomato. This is a yellow plum, or yellow pear, whatever term you want to use. And that's our mystery plant. Now, one last thing I need to do is, well, I need to mark these plants with a marker of some form or fashion, or just write on a piece of paper so you can identify what you have. I do want to cut any fruit off of these, as well as any flowers, because I want energy to go into root development. And most likely, if you leave those flowers on, the plant's already in a stress mode. It's going to drop those flowers and regenerate new ones in a timely fashion. So that being done, Now we're going to plant basil in all 4 corners of this bed, and we'll add more to this bed as the time comes. This is some basil that we started way back in the spring and never got planted. The nice thing about basil is it can handle being root bound or in a very tight root location, such as in a container. You can see those roots, a lot of roots there. This is an Italian large leaf basil, just a normal variety. I've got some cinnamon, some lemon, some lime basil in here. I think there's a couple other varieties as well. So first of all, I'm going to take any discolorated leaves off, because the plant's going to try to focus energy to those, to revitalize those, and I just want the plant to start revitalizing or regrowing the top there. Now, these leaves are totally fine, they just don't have the greenness, the flavor's still there. So all I'm going to do here is, there's a little, you can see right here, there's a little bad spot there. I'm just going to cut that flush, kind of clean it up a little bit. And in the corner here, I'm just going to go down just like I would. Now I'm not going to plant these deep because they don't have roots that come up the stalk like the tomato plant does. I'm just going to plant it as it was in the container, right above the root stock. You can use your hand, that's probably the best thing. Now you'll hear rumors or see things on the internet that says you plant your tomatoes and your basil next to one another and it makes the tomatoes sweeter. That is a total myth. There's no physiological change that one allows the other to have in order for the tomatoes to be sweeter. That's simply not true. We're planting them close simply because of the proximity of the grow bed, and we can get good basil out of this, so we can have fresh basil all year round, all winter long, or wherever you're growing this all year round. We will go ahead and hook the irrigation system up. It talks very in detail on how to do that in the manual that comes with your Eco Garden House, as well as the last thing we will do is we will lower the lights down and we will put these on a 14 hours on, 8 hours off, or 14 hours on, 10 hours off cycle to mimic outdoor summertime temperatures. You can read about what you think would be best for your particular plants and growing. Each plants are a little different in the amount of light that is required. Tomatoes, basil, the general vegetables that we are going to be growing can do just fine with 14 hours of light and 10 hours of darkness. And as we see maybe some are not doing as well as others, we will mimic or tweak the light just a little bit in order to compensate for the problems that we may have. So the tomatoes, basil, raised bed, grow bag, container will grow very, very well in the Eco Garden House. Thanks for joining us on Growing Indoors of the Eco Garden House. I'm Joy Baird.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.